Hello and welcome to the WPAOG podcast. This episode features an interview with Coach Brian Riley, head coach at the United States Military Academy at West Point. Coach Riley has 18 seasons as Army hockey's head coach. Following 14 years as an assistant to his brother Rob and a lifetime of hockey education from his father Jack, Brian knew all about the U.S. Military Academy. Brian is just the third Army hockey coach in the past 70 years, following in the footsteps of his father and brother who led the program before him. Aside from his standard coaching responsibilities, Brian served as the president of the American Hockey Coaches Association from 2014 to 2017. He has also served on the NCAA Division I Men's Ice Hockey Committee from 2013 to 2018. Brian began his coaching career in 1984 after graduating from Brown in 1983. In this episode, Coach Riley relives his father's stories, specifically his success in hockey at the 1960 Squaw Valley Winter Olympics and receiving an Olympic gold medal as a coach. He also talks about his own personal journey towards achieving his dream job and fulfilling the Riley family legacy. But before we get into it, here's a brief word from the Military Officers Association of America.
Every service member has two families, the ones they're fighting with and the ones they're fighting for. The Military Officers Association of America is busy behind the lines on behalf of both, advocating for everything from better housing to more support programs. Because it's nice to have someone on your side when you're in charge of a family, let alone two of them. Learn more at joinmoaa.org.
Now, please enjoy this interview between Coach Brian Riley and your host, Nikolai Busko.
Hello, everyone. For those who are not familiar with me, I'm Nikolai Busko, the longtime voice of Army hockey, and we're thankful for the opportunity today that we have to speak with our guest. He has led the hockey program at the U.S. Military Academy since 2004, but his family has held a presence on post since his father, Jack Riley, became the coach of this team in 1950. We welcome Brian Riley to the podcast. I'm personally grateful that we can take our time with this and not be in a rush to get to a game or practice. We're just glad to be together. Brian, thanks for joining us. How are things going today, sir?
Great, Nikolai. Thanks for having me. I appreciate the opportunity extended by the West Point Association of Graduates to get on here and talk about Army hockey and the longevity of the Riley family here since my dad came in 1950.
It feels like an eternity, but at the same time, I think the more things change, the more they stay the same. And I think back to the end of that first season in 2005, we had a post-game interview at Northford Ice Pavilion after the team lost to Quinnipiac in the playoffs. And I remember asking you about going through everything here as a head coach for the first time. I think I actually said, now that you've seen it all from the top, are you glad you took the job? And you said, this is my dream job. What does it mean to wake up every morning and have this job?
I tell people my dad obviously had a lot of success as a player, as a coach. And so growing up here at West Point, I often would think like, why doesn't dad go to a big hockey school? Why does he stay at West Point? Well, now that I've had the opportunity to kind of sit where he sat, I know why he stayed. And to be able to be around these cadets on a daily basis makes this the most rewarding and humbling, I wouldn't even call it a job, I guess, opportunity in all of college sports. So, you know what, Nikolai, before my feet hit the ground every morning, whether it was back in 2003 or 2023 now, I can't wait to get into the office. And the day really picks up when the cadets come up from what I call down below. And it just kind of reminds me every day how fortunate that I am to be able to say that I get the opportunity to coach here at West Point.
These aren't just cadet athletes. They are warrior scholars and servant leaders. And a few former players of yours are not just in the Army, but some of them are actually playing pro hockey at the moment. What does it mean to not only help prepare these young men as soldiers in the U.S. Army, but also help a few of them advance their hockey careers?
The ultimate goal is to help prepare these young men to lead our nation's sons and daughters, right? And through their experience as cadet athletes here, I would like to believe that a lot of our players would say that many of the leadership skills that they learned and developed were not just from down below, but were also from their experience as being a hockey player. Now saying that, you're right. We do have a few players that are chasing a dream of being able to play professional hockey, which I think is great. But they also know, and they are also looking forward to, when once their career ends, the opportunity to join the ultimate team, and that team being the U.S. Army. And I know once they finish their careers as professional hockey players, they will, as they become officers, represent this institution how it deserves to be represented. So we're very fortunate, and I'm very appreciative of the fact that our players are able to pursue the opportunity to be professional athletes, professional hockey players.
So this is West Point's ultimate family business dating back to 1950. For those unfamiliar with Jack Riley, he grew up in Medford, Mass, just outside Boston, played prep hockey at Tabor Academy, which is on the waters of Buzzards Bay. Brian, how did your father end up at Dartmouth?
My dad went to Tabor, like you said, and he was a big Boston hockey guy, high school player. And Eddie Jeremiah was a longtime coach at Dartmouth. And somehow he had heard of my dad, and my dad went up there. And also up there at the time, I believe, was Coach Red Blake. So my dad, obviously being up at Dartmouth, and then two of his brothers followed him up to Dartmouth. So when it came time for me to look at schools, I certainly wasn't going to go to Dartmouth and follow in their footsteps, knowing what they had done during their careers there. But a lot of great memories for the Riley family connected to Dartmouth.
And one of the big ones is that your uncles were a couple of the big first postseason stars in college hockey. Dartmouth participated in the first ever Frozen Four in 1948. Bill and Joe were still on the team, and Joe was named the first most outstanding player in the tournament's history. What would they and your father say about the Frozen Four's beginnings?
Well, they didn't necessarily have it when my dad was there. Actually, my dad went in, and then once the invasion of Pearl Harbor happened, my dad and many of the athletes at Dartmouth left to Jacksonville Naval Air Station to be a pilot. And then he came back to Dartmouth after serving for 2 years and finished up his career. But when he was there, they just had like a North American championship, and Dartmouth beat UT, University of Toronto. But then the following year, with my Uncle Joey and my Uncle Billy were there, they started the Frozen Four. 1 year they lost to BC by a goal, and they had beaten BC earlier in the year. And then the second year, the stories that I had heard, they lost to Michigan, but they weren't happy because they were in the locker room in between periods, and they had a goal taken away and they had a penalty added. So when you mention Michigan to my dad or my two uncles, like, they didn't have very fond memories of what happened when they played Michigan for the national championship. But I know that my Uncle Joey, I think he still might have the record for most goals or most points in an NCAA tournament.
When his time in the service finished, did your father have any thoughts about not returning to Dartmouth? I mean, war can change people.
First of all, I tell people my dad had a lot of success, like I said, as a coach internationally here at West Point. But when you really wanted to see my dad get a twinkle in his eye, ask him about his family, or ask him about his cadets, or ask him about his time serving, his time as a Navy pilot. He was so proud and just honored to have had the opportunity to serve his country. And kind of funny story, I was with him one day when a reporter asked him, "Hey, Coach Riley, were you nervous, before the gold medal game?" And my dad looked at him without skipping a beat. And he said, "Hey, I've never been nervous before a hockey game." I said, "You want to know when I was nervous? When I was flying and it was pitch black and there's no instruments to go by." He goes, "That's when I was nervous. But a hockey game, never was I ever nervous before a hockey game. But coming back to Dartmouth, I think that's what so many of them did back then. A lot of the Dartmouth athletes, many of them were in the same squadron. And then I think when the war was over, many of them went back to finish their education. And my dad did that.
And after he graduated, your father began service to USA Hockey, starting with joining the national team. And then he thought he was going to play in the 1948 Olympics in St. Moritz, but two teams showed up. What happened?
Yeah, there was I don't know the rift between the two teams. My dad stayed with one. I think they wound up finishing fourth in the Olympics, but it was kind of strange that they would have two teams and that there was a split. But my dad was loyal to Walter Brown, who had a say with his team. And yeah, just an experience. It's pretty neat. When we went out to see him get inducted into the U.S. Olympic Ice Hockey Hall of Fame, we were actually able to watch video clips of him playing in those Olympic Games in St. Moritz. And I mean, I am telling you, like my jaw hit the floor, like watching him. I actually have a picture on my desk of him scoring a goal against the Czechs. They wound up tying, I think, 2-2, and he had both goals. But I know having the opportunity to obviously play in the Olympics was really an unbelievable experience for him, and would later, at that time, I'm sure he didn't know that he would later coach in the Olympics. But yeah, he had a lot of fond memories of playing in St. Moritz with his teammates.
So after St. Moritz, he was ended up as the player coach of the national team for the 49 IIHF World Championships. That was his first taste of coaching. True or false? He promised Jack Kelly, who ultimately played and coached at BU, that he was a spot on the team in 1949 if he got your father a date with a young lady named Maureen Hines. Is that how it went down, Brian?
Absolutely. They were in Cape Cod. They were actually at Craigville Beach, and my dad noticed my mom, and my dad said to Jack Kelly, whose son David Kelly is a big Hollywood producer now, but he said to him, "Who's that?" And Jack Kelly said, "Oh, that's Maureen Hines." And he said, "Well, if you get me a date with her, I will get you on the Queenie, and you will come to Europe with us, and you will be on the national team." He got him the date, and Coach Kelly, he was on the team. So, yeah, that's a true story.
In 1950, Red Blake gives your dad the job of coach of the hockey team at West Point. What did your father know about the academy before taking the job?
He knew, obviously, when he was at Dartmouth, they played against West Point. I don't think West Point had a lot of success against them, but my dad came down to meet with Coach Blake. Coach Blake asked him to come down and talk about the hockey job. And my dad said that he was sitting out waiting to get in with Coach Blake, and an officer walked by and looked at my dad and said, "Hey, Riley, just because you're here doesn't mean you're getting the job." And my dad, knowing my dad, spouted right back, "Hey, Colonel, just because I'm here doesn't mean I'm taking the job." So he took it, what he told Coach Blake, "All right, I'll do it for a year." And he commuted back and forth from Boston that year. And obviously 1 year turned into 36. So that's kind of how it started. I don't think my dad necessarily had intentions of coming and coaching at West Point for a career, but I can see why he did. All you have to do is be around these cadets and be around the officers, the enlisted men that are here on West Point, and being around them every day. Like I think I told you earlier, Nikolai, there's no better place to coach. And so I can see why he stayed for 36 years.
As the program started winning consistently in the late 1950s, the Olympics in Squaw Valley began approaching. How did your father end up coaching the Olympic team?
Well, he knew some of the people with USA Hockey, and I think from his experience as a player coach, from his experience playing, I think they reached out to him and asked him if he'd be interested in being the Olympic coach. And obviously he had to get permission from the people here at West Point, and they allowed him to do it. And the rest was kind of history once he took the job.
Is it true that after they won the gold medal, that all the players went their separate ways quickly?
Absolutely. They all had to get back to work. I think the youngest player, Tommy Williams, might have been the one player that had a pro career. Jack McCartan, the goalie, might have played some pro hockey, but the majority of them, like you said, Nikolai, went their separate ways, and there were no parades or fanfare. So, and kind of interesting story with that. My dad got a gold medal, and back then the coaches weren't supposed to get a gold medal. Somehow he got one. About 2 weeks after the Olympics, he got a call from his general manager, Jim Claypool, saying, "Hey, Jack, the Olympic Committee wants the gold medal back." And my dad said, "Hey, Jim, you can tell them, and I'll watch what I say here." But basically what he said was, "Jim, you can tell them I threw that gold medal in the gosh darn Hudson River. Like, they are never getting that medal back." My dad actually kept the gold medal in his top drawer underneath his t-shirts. Like, people would come over to our house, my friends, and they'd see the pictures downstairs of all my dad's teams, all my dad's picture with his captains every year. And then on one other wall was pictures of the Olympics. And it would inevitably come around to, "Does he have a gold medal?" And I'd say, "Yeah." And I'm like, "Do you want to see it?" And they'd always say yes. And so I'd go upstairs into my mom and dad's room, open his top drawer, underneath his t-shirt, pull out the gold medal and bring it down and show all my buddies.
Wow. Now, we should point out that your father was not the only West Point connection to that 1960 team. The backup goalie, Larry Palmer, was on that team. In fact, I think your dad cut McCartan at first and then brought him back. A couple of years ago, I think Larry Palmer didn't just bike his way up from Florida, he pedaled. What did it mean to see him after all these years?
I think every coach has a connection to, or tries to create a connection to, their alumni base. I have a connection through my dad and through my brother. I know all these, or I certainly heard of all of these players. All these players for my dad, I mean, they were like his sons. And Larry Palmer, yeah, he biked up from Florida. He lives over in Switzerland. He's biked across the country. But you're right, my dad, I think he did cut Jack McCartan. And I think players are like, "Hey, coach, like, this guy, you should bring this guy back." And if my dad was here today, he would tell you, like, one of the main reasons why they won the gold medal was because of Jack McCartan. So I'm sure that he always looked back and was like, "I'm glad I gave him a second opportunity."
How did life change for your father and your family after the Olympics?
I was just born, so I was like 6 months old, but I saw pictures, my dad with President Kennedy and, being mask guys, and just obviously only one team can ever be the first. And so the first team to win the gold medal, it just, I think, resonated with the hockey world. And my dad was a humble guy. I mean, he was really competitive, like I said, and wanted to win. So winning that gold medal, he was awfully proud of it. And I don't know if it necessarily opened doors for him. I'm sure it did, but he wasn't leaving West Point because he won a gold medal. I can tell you that.
In the 1960s, your father ran the Eastern Hockey Clinic, and this camp had NHL players as coaches. Was this a precursor at all to the Riley Hockey Clinic of today?
Absolutely. So Eastern Hockey School was probably the first hockey camp out there, held in Worcester, Mass. And it was at Worcester Polytech Institute. And I was lucky enough that my dad would bring me for a couple of days. And there were all sorts of NHL players there. And I think part of winning the Olympics, like, this is my dad. People reached out to him to be involved with, whether it be with camps and then my dad was like, "Hey, we can start our own camp." And he did that, the Jack Riley Hockey Camp, which was in Lenox, Massachusetts. 8 weeks. The kids would come in on a Sunday. They'd play their games Saturday morning. And yeah, we would be in Lenox for 8 weeks. My dad, he was there on check-in day and check-out day. So between coming back to West Point, between going to the Cape, But he had, like I said, there were 4 boys, like my older brothers were making sure that everything ran smooth. And it's amazing how many people that I bump into nowadays that say, "Oh, I went to your dad's camp in Lenox," and it's pretty neat when that happens.
Your brother Mark still directs these camps after 3 decades. When you work with him in that setting, does your approach to those players, these young men, differ from the one that you have with the cadets?
Well, yeah, I mean, like we have a camp here every year, and it's been really successful. And COVID shut it down for a couple of years, but we've got it back going. Number one, you want to make it a positive experience. You want to make it an experience where they have fun, and number two, they're here at West Point. Like I hope that because of the kids that come to the Army hockey camp, that maybe someday or when they leave here, it inspires them to say, "Hey, man, that would be pretty cool to go to West Point and be a cadet." And so I think we've done a good job. We've had a lot of kids come through here, and actually have had some kids that have gone to the camp that have wound up playing for us here at Army.
As part of your own journey as a player at Brown, you captained the team during your senior year, but went through a coaching change. Was there anything you learned about coaching as you went through that transition as a player from Paul Schilling to Herbert Hammond?
Well, I was the captain that year, my senior year, and it was, we didn't have a successful year. And I tell people it's easy coming to the rink when you're winning every game. You learn a lot about yourself when you have to battle through adversity. And when you're the captain, you need to make sure that you're holding on to the rope and pulling as hard as you can and making sure that the guys around you are doing the same. So I learned a lot in that year. I was grateful to have had the opportunity to play for Coach Schilling. I loved him as a coach. And then I was grateful to have played for Coach Hammond, great guy. So I think with every coach that you play for, whether it be college, high school, pee-wees, like they all make an impression on you. And as I became a coach, I probably took something from all of the coaches that I had the privilege to play for.
Your first real coaching job came in 1984 in Plattsburgh, a Division III program that puts a winning product on the ice almost every year. You were an assistant under Steve Hoare, who had just arrived there himself, just spending a few years with your father at West Point. Did it feel like you were working with your father at all because of the time Steve spent here?
My dad would tell you, like, Steve was probably his greatest recruiter, and he was a phenomenal recruiter. For me, being up at Plattsburgh and coaching with him, first of all, Plattsburgh was, I didn't really know anything about Plattsburgh until I got up there and saw what an amazing hockey town that it was. But I had a unbelievable experience there. I learned, again, back to the coaches. Steve was another guy that I learned a great deal from, and was grateful that he gave me an opportunity to get into coaching.
It was during your time in Plattsburgh that the hockey team at the academy left Smith Rink for Tate Rink, and your father handed the controls off to your brother Rob. Your father said the final practice felt like his own funeral, and he could barely put a sentence together after the last game. Was riding off into the sunset as hard for the rest of the family as it was for him?
I'm sure it was for my dad, because he said, like I told you earlier, he's such a competitor. I'm sure he would have wanted to keep coaching, but my mom for 36 years had been by his side, and her goal was to ultimately get to Cape Cod and enjoy retirement. And I think recruits would probably tell you, my dad was telling them probably for 20 years that there was going to be a new rink here. But when it finally came, he wanted to make sure that he got at least 1 year in that rink. And so I wasn't around for the last game. I was involved in games up at Plattsburgh. I'm kind of glad that I wasn't around, because what was going to happen for my brother Rob, that he was going to get the opportunity to take over for my dad. But I just, at that time, couldn't imagine my dad not coaching at West Point.
So after you're working with your cousin Bill at Lowell, you finally came back here as Rob's assistant in 1989. Unfortunately, the team left the ECAC a couple of years later, played a schedule that included some weekends against Division I programs and some weekends against teams D3. Can you explain how challenging it was to keep things going as an independent program?
Yeah, and that's what it was. It was becoming an independent program, finding the right fit. And so there was a lot of different games. But the bottom line is when the puck is dropped, like you have to be ready to play, regardless if you're playing Harvard or UMass Boston. Like it doesn't make any difference. Like you got to try to win. And so just kind of finding the right league. You got to remember with hockey, the pool here is a lot smaller than all the other sports here because most of the teams that we would play against were loaded with, back then, I would say international students, but really Canadians. And so we could never get the Canadians. But I thought it worked well. And those were certainly fun times coaching here. The cadets were awesome. I'll never forget, I came from Lowell, and our first game, my first year here, was against Lowell. And after the first practice, I remember looking at my brother Rob going, man, I don't know. Like, it could be some rough sledding when Lowell comes in here on that first game. He looked at me, he said, Bri, don't worry. He said, these guys will be ready. And lo and behold, he was right. I think we shut Lowell out that night, 3-0 or whatever. But I always knew that the cadets just they have a compete level that is just different than at other schools. Their toughness, both mental and physical. I tell recruits, I truly believe that I don't care what sport it is here at West Point. If you put on a jersey and it has Army across your chest, you better be friggin' tough. And so that has always been something that we try to work toward, being a team that is tough, being a team that is hard to play against. And I think those are the type of young men that come here to West Point that we have the honor to coach.
You had what some would call the opportunity of a lifetime in 1996, head coach at Shattuck St. Mary's Prep School, Minnesota. Casual hockey fans may recognize the school as where Sidney Crosby briefly played. Was it easy to leave home, or did you find it difficult?
Oh, it was hard. I just felt at that stage, after having been an assistant, to kind of get out on my own and be a head coach. And at that time, Shattuck was kind of there was a buzz about Shattuck. People, knew of it. And when I went out there, it reminded me of a miniature West Point, just kind of the buildings. And so I felt very comfortable, but it was hard leaving. My wife comes from town here, Highland Falls, like a big family, hard leaving all of them with our 3 kids, and hard leaving my brother Rob, and really hard leaving the cadets. I just thought that, all right, this would be an opportunity to develop as a coach. And I'm thankful that, number one, that they gave me the opportunity. And I look back and I'm glad that I made the decision to go out there.
You return to Army after 2 seasons at Shattuck. Then 5 years go by. CHA, the MAC, Atlantic Hockey, and then Rob leaves. At what point did you realize that something might happen and you might end up having the job as head coach?
Well, first of all, I was out there in Shattuck for my second year, had just finished. And I'll never forget, we were in the Minnesota Children's Hospital with our daughter who was getting her tonsils out at the time. And my brother called and he said, hey, Bri, we lost Hags today. And I'm like, what do you mean we lost Hags? Hags is Paul Haggerty, who had taken my place as the assistant coach here. And he said, Hags died. And I'm like, what? So Hags was running the stadium stairs with the team, and he just kind of paused and stopped. And the guys were like, are you okay? He said, yeah. And then he just collapsed. And I don't know why. I just felt that if Rob would take me, that I had to come back and be part of the, healing process for all of us. And so I was, again, grateful that Rob gave me a chance to come back. And I'll never forget, I was here in the Holiday Center, and he came in the office one day and said, hey, Bri, I'm going down to tell Rick Greenspan that, you know what, I'm going to step away from coaching, go up to Boston, and my heart kind of sank because I could have been the assistant coach for my brother Rob for my whole coaching career. I enjoyed every minute of it. And at that moment, it kind of hit me like, uh-oh, like, what's going to happen to me? Like, are they just going to, bring in somebody else who will probably bring in new assistant coaches? And I'm like, I guess I'm going to find out. My brother Rob went down to talk to Rick Greenspan, and he came back and he said, Rick wants to meet you at 4:00. Why don't you come down to his office at 4? So down I went, and I'll never forget, went in his office, and he was in there, had a cigar in his mouth, and had a couple of his associates in there. And he just kind of looked at me. He said, so you want to be the head coach here at Army? And I said, yes. He said, all right, I want you to meet me at 6:00 tomorrow at my house. So I left. I got up to the rink and I was like, uh-oh, 6:00. Did he mean 6 in the morning? Did he mean 6 at night? Like so I rolled the dice and I'm thinking, all right, 6 in the morning, but I didn't sleep that night. I was trying to think of what I was going to say to him. And I'm a pretty superstitious guy. I obviously growing up at West Point, the Catholic chapel here, the Most Holy Trinity, was right up the road from Rick Greenspan's house. So I thought I would go and get a little extra help that morning and get the man upstairs on my side. I was going into the church and I went to go in and all the doors were locked. And I'm like, uh-oh, this is not a good sign. So down I went. We had a conversation. My brother and I had to leave that day to go up to Massachusetts to a wake. I came out from the wake and I had a message from Rick Greenspan, and I told my brother Rob, I'm like, Rick called me. He wants me to call him. And he's like, well, you got to call him. And I'm like, I don't know if I want to call him. He said, you have to call him. So I called him and he said, hey, you want to be the next coach, right? And I said, absolutely. He said, okay, you got the job. And yeah, I never, ever would have imagined. I still, to this day, pinch myself that I'm the head hockey coach at West Point. Not many people get their dream job. I mean, it's the dream job that I never even dreamed of because I never thought I would ever have. So yeah, I'm really appreciative of Rick Greenspan for giving me the opportunity. And I think it was Mr. Ulrich giving me the opportunity to come here as an assistant coach. Those two men, I will be, like I said, forever eternally grateful to them for what they did for me by allowing me the opportunity to coach here at West Point.
As the years have passed, you've introduced an audience to the hockey program at West Point by often speaking of two people who made the ultimate sacrifice. One of them has an award in college hockey named after him that often has a feel deeper than the one for the Hobie Baker. What does Derek Hines mean to this program?
So Derek Hines and Tom Kennedy. I have a lot of hats that I wear, I guess, as a coach here at West Point, but I tell everybody one of the most important jobs that I have at West Point is to make sure that the legacy of First Lieutenant Derek Hines and Major Tom Kennedy live on. And that's why any opportunity I get to speak about them, like I'll go to the top of the mountain. And I've spoken to a whole class of new cadets, their cadre. I've spoken to numerous NHL teams. I've spoken to Team USA, NFL teams. For me, it's about helping their legacy to live on. And it's what I usually do is make it into a leadership talk and talk about the qualities that made them the leaders that they were. Like I tie in commitment, accountability, selflessness, team first guys. And man, I think about them every day. Like I have 2 wrists and on each wrist I have a KIA bracelet. Like I don't like to lose. My biggest fear is not losing. My biggest fear would be to lose another player. Like I said, my 2 wrists are occupied now with KIA bracelets. And every day I come to the rink, I drive by the cemetery and I can look and see TK's tombstone. And if nobody's there, I'll give him 2 quick toots. I often go down there to see him, stay in touch with Hines' family. The hardest thing ever in coaching is to lose your players, and that happened in 2005 and 2012. And to be quite honest, Nikolai, I don't know if I've ever fully recovered from that. But that's why I am so adamant on making sure that people know the great men that they were. And I love their families. The Army hockey family has rallied around them. And that's the other thing about being here at West Point, to see how the Army family, the long gray line, how they rally around their own. They have not forgotten Derek Hines or Tom Kennedy. And I know that they never will. So, like I said, there's no game that will ever hurt as much as losing 2 of your players.
Nearly 2 years ago, you earned the Riley family's 1,000th victory, yet you quickly gave credit to all the assistant coaches who have worked with you. What has that group of men meant to the program's success over the years?
Well, yeah, 1,000 victories for the Riley family. Like I told people, I'm not a math guy, but I know where I rank in the pecking order with my dad, certainly, and Rob. I mean, it's the players, like to have amazing players and to be surrounded with staff every year. Right now, I have one of the best coaches in college hockey, and Zach McKelvey, and he's a class 2009 grad. I mean, he gave so much to the program as a player, and now he's giving so much to it as a coach. But I've been fortunate to have so many wonderful coaches and, like I said, staff members. It truly what makes that, along with the cadets, like coming to work every day, so enjoyable, because you get to be around people that truly love West Point and believe in West Point, believe in duty, honor, country, and are totally committed to helping to shape and develop, like I said earlier, our young men to be future leaders and leaders that lead this nation's sons and daughters. So many great people I've had the opportunity to work with here at West Point.
What did it mean to have the family name on the Atlantic Hockey Trophy? What did it mean for the league to call it the Jack Riley Trophy at the end of the season?
Well, I know how much college hockey meant to my dad. So to see his name on a trophy, I know that he would be very proud. And I was really appreciative of the coaches in our league who kind of brought it up, and really humbling. Like I said, my dad, he spent his whole coaching career at one place and, loved college hockey. So my only goal now is I want to get my hands on it. I kind of got my hands on it last year because my son Brendan was at AIC, so he let me hold it for a second. But boy, oh boy, I sure would like to have that trophy in our locker room here at Tate Rink.
So now that you mentioned Brendan being part of another team, we're going to have some fun here at the end. It was uncomfortable for a lot of reasons, although there was some humor as well. After 2 years in junior with the Old Jersey Hitmen, your son Jack continued his hockey playing life at Mercyhurst, and then Brendan eventually followed him there. There was a lot of jokes and a lot of pain. Why was this such a difficult thing, not only for you, but for everybody in the whole family?
Well, you know what? My brothers, Jay played at Harvard. He came back and played here. My brother Mark played at BC. He came back and played here. My brother Rob played at BC. He came back and played here. I played at Brown. I came back and played here. I know how excited I was to play, and I'm sure that Jack was as well. But I remember telling both of them, like, before their first game coming back here, I'm like, you guys better keep your heads up. And they're like, what are you talking about, Dad? Like, Army is like our favorite team other than Mercyhurst. I said, yeah, guys, but the cadets, they can't hit me. So the next best thing to hitting me will be hitting you. So you better watch yourself. And it was pretty neat. Like I said, the first game with Jack, but I feel like we played against him forever. And then one of the highlights of my coaching career will be when Jack and Brendan happened to be, Jack was a senior, I think Brendan was a junior, and we're playing them here in Tate Rink. It was actually it was a night we dedicated the locker room to Major Thomas Kennedy. General Milley was Chief of Staff of the Army. He was up here. And before the game, at the starting lineup, they announced, starting at right wing, number 6 from West Point, New York, Brendan Riley. Starting at left wing, number 3 from West Point, New York, Jack Riley. And I thought, wow, that's pretty cool. Like, my dad would really like that. And I was like, look at these guys. They're living their dream. They're playing Division I college hockey back here at West Point in front of family and friends. Well, the puck drops, and 20 seconds in, Brendan shoots from the left faceoff circle. Not sure how it went in, but it went in. And part of me was like, what the hell happened? But then I was like, I think it's kind of cool for Brendan to be able to come here and score. Jack had already done it once before. He had 2 goals, 2 assists in here the year before. Well, Jack gets the second goal, the third goal, the fourth goal. We wind up losing, I think, 5-1 or 5-2. And I remember going through the line, shaking hands, and naturally Jack and Brendan were at the end. So I gave them both a hug and said I was proud of them. But then I looked at them. I said, guys, did you ever think of doing this against Air Force and not against your dad here at Army? And the good thing about them, they never bring it up. But I guess if we were going to lose and somebody was going to score, I would rather it be those guys than somebody else. But I was glad when the coaching against them as players was over with. I find myself following them when they're on the ice, and so it was pretty neat experience, but glad it's over. And now we do it. Brendan's now coaching at AIC, so he's on the bench. The good news is Jack's with us, so there's 2 of us, but it didn't help us the first time that we played him this year. But hopefully, I know that we have another crack at him, and we'll see how that plays out.
I feel like we could be here much longer. I've learned a lot myself, and I say that this is very much my hometown team as well, my boyhood team. Brian, I am grateful that you've joined us this morning. Thank you for being here, and we look forward to seeing you behind the bench as this season progresses, sir.
Nikolai, thanks for having me. And again, to the West Point Association of Graduates, I appreciate having the opportunity to come on and talk about Army hockey and what it's meant to the Riley family the last 70 plus years.
I'm Nikolai Busko. Thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you at Tate Rink sooner rather than later.
This has been a production of the WPAOG Broadcast Network. Please take a moment to rate and review the show and join us each week for a new episode. Thank you for listening.